All right, good luck, Randy. Today on Smarchitect Shortcast, I am thrilled and honored to welcome back a true pioneer in the world of data and AI leadership, Randy Bean. Randy
Hey,
is a globally recognized strategist, author, senior advisor who I have looked up on many times and who spent more than 4 decades, I think, helping
yes.
Fortune 1000 companies. Randy is also the best-selling author of Fail Fast, Learn Faster, a thought leader in Harvard Business Review, MIT Sloan, and so many other major outlets. And has created a name for himself with industry benchmarks as well, in addition to other things. In the recent years, Randy, I've seen your thought process I should say in the recent months, continue to evolve how organizations, empower roles like chief data analytics and AI officers. Randy, I'm thrilled to learn more from you. Thank you very much and welcome back to the show.
It's my pleasure and pleasure, Arvind. Great to be here with you. On the topic of data and AI leadership, I think it's helpful to put it in perspective and see where we are today. So fundamentally, the chief data officer role didn't really exist until the financial crisis of 2008, 2009, and then it was largely mandated for major banks in particular. So that type of financial crisis wouldn't happen again. And it was largely a risk and regulatory role, but it quickly spread into other industries, evolved into an offensive role focused on building the business, developing new capabilities. And at that time, it added in the analytics piece. So many chief data officers became chief data and analytics officers. And over those years, since 2008, the role progressively became a more offensive and focused on developing the business. And it's worth noting, you mentioned the survey that I've been conducting since 2012. And when we first conducted the survey back then, one of the questions we asked was whether your organization had appointed a chief data officer. And at that time in 2012, only 12% of organizations had. It was only by 2017 that we were over 50% at roughly 56%. But this year, it's 90%. So the role is clearly here and it's clearly established. However,
Oh my
one of the
God.
things that's also happening in conjunction with this is the appearance of the chief AI officer. And last year, for the first time, we asked, have you appointed a chief AI officer? And we were surprised that actually a third of the organization said that they had appointed somebody in that role or capacity. And this
Yeah.
year it jumped to 39%. So it's significant. And we also asked, should a chief AI officer be appointed? And over 50% said yes. And thinking about that, that led to an article that published in Harvard Business Review last week, co-authored with Vipin Gopal, longtime chief data officer at Eli Lilly and Walgreens, and Tom Davenport. And what we stated in the article was we advocated for a unified chief data analytics and AI officer role, and also one that reports is fundamentally a business role. At JPMorgan, their chief data and AI officer now is part of the 14-person operating committee. So I'll just pause there, but it's a very fluid time and also a tremendously exciting time to be in the data analytics and AI leadership roles.
Incredible. First of all, 90% of people
Yes.
now have chief data officers. That is incredible. Now, what is confusing to me a little bit is the fact that this unification that you call off as chief data and AI officer, right? So in my mind, and please correct me if I'm wrong, I'm thinking AI is very pervasive in multiple parts of the organizations. While it is easier said about the unification of AI, every application has AI embedded within it. AI is pretty much, ubiquitous in an enterprise. So how do you now determine that there is one organization over here who can own the impetus of AI and the outcome of AI, and one person who owns the accountability versus the others?
But a great question. Now I can do all my backtracking.
Okay.
So yes, we received. So first of all, it was the most read article that I've participated in publication of in the past 5 years. So the response has been extraordinary, and I really didn't care whether people agreed or disagreed. It was as much to stimulate conversation and force people to think. Now, about 80% of the responses have been we fully agree, and about 20% have been we we disagree for these reasons. And one of the reasons that is a very valid reason is that, and none of these things are simple, but the AI is widely federated and spread out, and the data is arguably more centralized. But we were thinking from the perspective of, you're going to have a chief digital officer, chief data officer, a chief analytics officer, a chief AI officer, all sitting in the C-suite. And how do you simplify this in terms of an organization? And you can have those subsets under you, but we're saying that, at the most senior level, it should really be unified.
So
Almost
somebody who's sitting
yeah.
in the board who's ultimately accountable for, chief AI officer or whatever title you want to use, somebody who's ultimately accountable for AI across the organization, whilst the capability itself could be spread in multiple parts or departments within the organization. Did I get that right?
Absolutely. In the same way that you have a chief operating officer, and that chief operating officer might have finance, might have HR, might have other functions. So they're not necessarily the expert in all of those functions, but they do have the ultimate ownership and responsibility, so that you don't have an operating committee that basically you need an auditorium to house.
No, makes perfect sense. Now, let me ask you this. There has been a big shift since the ChatGPT moment in May 2023. Every organization want to use LLMs. Every organization want to build intelligent, now the agents, right? What are the big trends and shifts? Now, you are recommending the unification, but what are you seeing that's driving you to get there immediately? What is it now that's making you hustle towards that?
I don't even know where to begin. Well, AI is going to have a transformational impact, whether one likes it or not. And often I say to audiences or organizations that for all the extent to which AI may be overestimated in the short term, and I believe in a lot of aspects it is, in the long term, we may be vastly underestimating the impact and the spread of AI. We had spoken before about the impact that this is having in organizations. I've sat in conversations in just the past couple of days where, for example, people said, and these were leading people from Silicon Valley as well as from the major New York financial institutions. They said during the financial services crisis, the major banks, like a JPMorgan, a Citigroup, a Bank of America, they reduced by 40,000, 50,000 employees. And what people are saying now is these organizations are planning for a similar type of potential reduction, but this is due to AI and the fact that so many of these jobs can be done by AI. And I held the Chief Data Officer Roundtable in New York last month with Iconic Capital, where I'm an advisor.
Yeah.
And we were talking about this topic of potential job loss. And so I made a statement to provoke the discussion. I said, so basically all of us who are over 50 are going to be out of a job. And somebody said, no. They said it's exactly the opposite. It says the people over 50 are going to be needed for their perspective, their judgment, that having seen the movie before, having lived through these various cycles. The people that are in danger are the people coming out of universities now, because those are the jobs that can be replaced most easily by AI. And so, what a number of organizations have said is that they're thinking about, over the next 5 to 10 years, how they operate as much leaner, much smaller organizations with significantly fewer employees. Whether all this plays out in that fashion remains to be seen, but many Fortune 1000 organizations are starting to think about what it means to be a smaller, leaner, but still equally effective organization servicing their franchises at the same level, generating the same revenues and growth.
I've been in it's interesting you bring this up about the 50 plus and how the two sides of the coins are. But I've been a consultant the last decade and a half. And interestingly, I just released an article today morning. So I've surveyed a handful of big consulting global SIs. And in that, there's also mixed emotion because the clients are expecting higher order thinking from consultants. That's why they hire us. But at the same time, our projects have shrunk massively. So what used to take 6 to 8 weeks 2-3 years ago is now taking about 2 to 3 weeks to build something, right?
Right.
And it doesn't happen with some of the seasoned consultants because one, they're nervous that AI will take over their job, and two, they're not technically I don't want to say savvy, but they're not AI first. There's a aspect to that. Now, on the other hand, if I go and hire somebody from UTD, University of Texas at Dallas, they're naturally AI savvy. So they use Cursor and they build an app in 2 minutes. Would they be able to build it in production? Not really. That's why they need people like me to figure that out. So I think the more I think through it of your statement, even the consulting world is constantly getting disrupted, where there's a fair bit of this. There used to be a pyramid model that McKinsey released a while ago. Now that pyramid is shifting more towards the top, that senior consultants are expected to do more with less, so to speak. So,
Well, 3 years ago, or maybe it was 4 years ago now, I had an interesting and unique opportunity, and that was that I conducted a fireside chat with a person in industry who had had a very varied and exciting career. This person had started as the road manager for Bob Dylan, later produced the first movies for Martin Scorsese, then got into technology, then became a professor at the Annenberg School at I guess it's University of Southern California, I believe. After people asked him, like, what was it like to hang out with, George Harrison from the Beatles, or what was Keith Richards and Mick Jagger really like, and this type of stuff, somebody said, I'm in college right now, and, I'm majoring in computer science, and is that where you think that people should be majoring and studying now? And this guy had been around a long time, and he was also grumpy in certain respects. And he said, only if you want to be replaced by an algorithm. He said, you should be studying critical thinking, broader liberal arts, because those are a lot of the perspectives that will be valued when a lot of roles and processes are replaced by algorithms. So, it's one point of view, but it was an interesting perspective.
This is very interesting. Now, I want to kind of shift my focus to value, right? We talked a lot about leadership, but look, leadership doesn't exist if there's no value. We all talk about AI because everybody believes in the value that it offers. You have run this benchmark survey for more than a decade now. Let me ask you this. What is the attitude of the C-suites that you're surveying particularly towards data and AI investment? And if it is increasing, you mentioned 90% now have CDOs and 30+% want to have or do have CAIO. They all have a number that they need to meet, bottom line or top line of the organization. What is the sentiment or data you're getting from these executives?
Okay, I'm going to come at this from two different perspectives. So over the last few years, there was a lot of experimentation and testing and piloting.
Sure.
But, that gets tiresome after a while, particularly when you're running a business and you need to show business value. So there's been a real push and real pressure on over the past year and a half, so that there's not a backlash, and so that they can justify these investments. And often, what I've said to audiences when I speak to them, in part to provoke discussion, I say, if you're not getting measurable business value from your data and AI investments, I suggest you go back to the office this afternoon and shut them down. Okay. And, there's always nuances and gradations, but the idea is, let's stop playing with things and let's make sure we're delivering business value. In the survey, have asked the last 2 years, are you delivering measurable business value from your data and AI investments? This year, roughly 18% of organizations said they were delivering a high degree, and another 35% said they were delivering a significant degree. So that's 35. That's in excess, roughly 50 to 55%. And then other organizations at various stages in terms of modest or minimal. But the main point there is it's heading in the right direction, with roughly 95% of organizations saying they're delivering some type of business value from their data and AI investments.
Sorry, but only 50%, only 50 plus or 53%, I think you mentioned, who are delivering in the higher end of the value. Okay.
Yes. So some value, 95%, higher highest value, now over 50%.
That's not bad.
The other thing, which, I think is extremely notable, because the numbers are pretty extraordinary. In 2024, when we asked what stage people were in their AI implementation efforts, 70% said they were at the early stage, experiment, testing, planning, and design. This year, 94% said they had implemented in production or production at scale. There was only 6% left at early stage. So that's, it went from, 30% who said they were in production or at scale to 95%. So, implemented in production at scale in 2024, 5% said they were. Last year, 23% said they were. And this year, it's 39%. So there's been a huge upward trajectory in terms of implementation.
Now, why is that? Do you think it's a cost factor, meaning AI is becoming more affordable, that you can run large scale workloads in production? Is it people are understanding this better the more the experimentation? Is it these big hyperscalers are, throwing a lot of freebies at you? What is the reason that is driving the spike?
I'd say two things. One is experience. So they've worked with it so they can develop confidence and move it into production. And then the other is pressure. In other words, the need to deliver business value. So, okay, you've played with this long enough. Now it's time to put up or shut up. So I think those are the two driving factors, pretty plain and simple.
Gotcha. You don't think cost is an additional factor, meaning cost going down, the AI value of AI or the cost of AI?
It probably is. I haven't really thought about that as much. What's been more evident is the gained experience as well as the, time to deliver.
Let me ask you this. The other question that comes to mind, simply put, the value of AI, if I just look at it as make money, save money, be compliant, those three big buckets, right? There is a top-down and a bottom-up approach. I'm increasingly seeing AI in the boardroom discussions, and there's a mandate to build AI capabilities across. Are you seeing that too? At the top of the organization, as you said, is there a mandate and a pressure to go deliver at every business process?
Well, absolutely. And that's why, for example, at JPMorgan, the individual, the chief data and AI officer is now part of the 14-person operating committee. At companies like Colgate, Paul Olive, the chief data and AI officer, is part of the operating committee. So it's still the exception as opposed to the rule, but that wasn't the case 2 or 3 years ago. And now I think you'll see a steady progression of AI and data leaders being part of the operating committee. And that's because AI is going to be hugely transformational. One of the questions that asked in the survey each year, and I'll see if I can find it quickly, is whether you believe that AI would be the most transformative technology in a generation. And in 2024, 64% said they believed it would be the most transformational. This year, it was 83%. So there's, there's still 17% that aren't bought in, but the trajectory again is people are saying, this is going to have a major impact on all aspects of our business, not only in terms of our operations, but the size of our organization, the efficiency of our processes. So they're really critically rethinking all aspects of their business in light of the transformative potential of AI.
So I'm just going back to my notes. You mentioned 94% have implemented AI in production one way or the other, but then 17% don't believe in AI. The math somehow doesn't,
Well,
or are they different audiences?
Well, no, it's the same audience, but the question was, did they believe it was the most transformational technology in a generation? So it doesn't mean that they don't buy in, but it doesn't necessarily. There's the ones who say it's the most the 83% who say it's the most transformative technology in a generation. They're basically saying since the internet.
Gotcha. So they're still not seeing the same level of clarity and disruption as the internet yet. These 17% is what you're saying.
Yeah, or they think that there's been something in between that was significantly transformational. There could be multiple reasons, but they're not fully bought in that AI will have the overall impact that the internet did.
And I want to get into the most important reason of them all, culture. So look, I think that, we talked about this before we started recording. I have been hearing time and again with the CDOs that I work with on daily basis that culture seems like the most important issue they need to tackle to get AI mainstream across the organization. So the challenge that I'm facing is that without adoption, none of this will go to production. because the technology is there. I mean, it's getting mature every day. That's not the problem. The problem is people are not using it either the way it's supposed to, or people are not giving clarity as to how it could possibly transform their lives. As Ford said a long time ago, if I would have asked my customers what they wanted, they could have said a faster horse. Yet here we are talking about cars, right? It's the same situation now. I just want to better my business process, but I don't want to change it. I still want to keep it the way it is. Culture is one of the most difficult things that as a consultant I face with my clients every single day. You wrote an article called Think Different, where you argued the kind of the leaders must break from the path and chart a new AI future. In your mind, what are the 2-3 things you're thinking or the leader should think about for this kind of a fundamental mindset shift, if you will?
Yeah, I could talk on this topic for hours, days, or weeks.
That's your next book, by the way.
Yeah. Let me just say a few things. One of the questions that we ask, and it's kind of my favorite question that I ask each year, is what's the principal challenge to data and AI adoption? And it's kind of a binary question. We say, is it basically culture and people or technology? Which is the barrier? It's always been significantly high in terms of people and culture. So 2 years ago in 2024, 78% of the respondents said culture and people were the greatest barrier, and the other 22 or so said it was technology. This year it was 93% said it was culture and people, and only 7% said it was technology. But none of this, from my vantage point, should be surprising to anyone because, having run a consulting firm for 20 years, having been, on both sides of the fence for, multiple decades, what I've always seen is, technology is typically far in advance of people's ability and willingness to adopt it. And fundamentally, people, don't like change, or they like change in manageable amounts. And companies, organizations are made up of many, many, many people. So the problem's exponential. And it's not just technology change, it's societal change too, in terms of anything from distribution of wealth to any number of things. And it causes backlashes of various kinds. So business transformation is never easy. I'd also point out that 90% of Fortune 1000 companies are legacy companies, meaning they've existed for more than a generation. So they're not the 10% that are the fail fast, break things type of crowd. And so as a consequence, that 90% doesn't really need to necessarily compete against the other 10%. They just need to compete against the 90%. So, for example, during the pandemic a few years ago, the chief digital officer of the nation's largest insurance company said to me, we've done more to execute on our digital transformation strategy in the past 6 months than we did in the previous 20 years. Oof. And the reason why is because it became existential. In other words, people were dealing virtually, remotely. If you weren't able to do that, your business could potentially die and you could lose your customers. So before that, it was kind of like a nice to have. You could pay lip service to it. You could say, we're doing these things on our online channels, and to varying degrees and significant degrees they did. But in terms of going all in and converting all of the key processes so that the company could survive in a world where you needed to be virtual, it was that type of event that triggered that. So I would suspect that with AI, people will adopt it to varying degrees. They'll pay lip service. They'll say we're all in on AI, et cetera, et cetera. But it's not really until there's that existential event that appears that they really go 1000% all over. I used to have this term that I used, and nobody knew what I was talking about because it wasn't like any type of lingo or buzzword that was used. But I always came out of meeting either engaged or disengaged, and people would say, "Oh, so you weren't engaged?" And then I said, "Yeah, because they weren't ready." And they were like, "What do you mean?" And I said, "Well, it's the readiness factor, readiness to change, readiness to adopt, adapt, readiness to transform. And you always got a pretty quick sense of that by the way that people engaged and answered questions, whether they were there with their arms folded or they were like, what can we do? What can we
Personality.
try?
Yeah. The
Yeah.
behavioral.
How can we do things differently?
Right.
And it's funny too, because people would ask me about, what organizations are the most successful in terms of adopting new technologies and transforming their organizations over time. And there's some examples that I point to, and often it's some of the most established companies or companies that are looked at as being very successful in what they do, like Capital One, for example, that every time over the years I've had a conversation with Capital One, they're like, what are other people doing? We're not satisfied. We feel that we're losing traction. What are they doing over here? What are the startups doing? So they have this relentless drive to transform and improve, as opposed to those who sit there and say, we get things under control, things are fine. No, we're not too concerned. Those are the companies that I worry more about.
So this is in my mind, how COVID kind of reset this whole work from home model, digitizing a lot of how we operate. AI is now thinking how to do faster, cheaper, better, differenter, whatever words you want to use. And you mentioned the word pressure a little while ago, where your board is putting pressure on you to do AI technology across the board. How are these people who are hands crossed and how are they managing that kind of pressure when they're mandated to use AI across the organizations? Like, what is the fundamental human behavior? Is it confidence? Is it anger? Is it resistance? What does the data say?
I'm going to answer that from this perspective. When people or organizations ask me about this, and they ask me in a nervous or frantic fashion, like, what can we do? How do we?
Yeah.
I kind of tell them to, not in so many words, but I tell them to chill out, to take a step back, to look at things in perspective, to maybe read history and look at the lessons of history.
Of course.
And, major transformations, new technologies, they unfold over years, decades, centuries, and so forth. So yes, there will be parts of AI that have impact in 2026. There'll be other parts that the full impact will play out over the next decade, and other parts will become more fully understood and integrated, over the course of the next generation.
Yes.
So it's really fundamentally a long game, and I believe the most successful organizations will take the long view. They won't rush into things unnecessarily. They'll think about, where do we want to be in 2 years? Where do we want to be in 3 years? Where do we want to be in 10 years? Where do we want to be in 20 years? What are the steps that we need to take? What are the capabilities that we need to put in place? And think about it from that perspective.
Crawl, walk, run kind of phase, right? Yeah.
So yes, I think that taking a long view is very important, and those organizations that are playing a long game are the ones that will ultimately be most successful. Not the follow the leaders, but the ones that, back to your previous questions, are thinking differently, thinking, what does this mean for our industry? What does this mean for us? How can we do things in ways that we haven't done them before? So they're really thinking from a much larger perspective.
See, talking about that, let me ask you this. The biggest fear for me is responsible governance and risk management. I think, to your point about long game, right? There's a lot of marketing pressure. A lot of the big tech vendors are pushing AI agenda to you. Right, wrong, or indifferent, I'm not here to argue that. But at the end of the day, the big hyperscalers, they all have AI, they all have magic in them. How do you responsibly use AI whilst keeping in mind that you're under pressure to deliver value using AI?
I think responsible use of AI is probably the single most important question that organizations need to be asking themselves today, because if you don't use it responsibly, among other things, you can put at risk your customers and your franchise and your stakeholders, among other things. And one of the questions in the survey that asked are whether there's, we asked three things. One is investment in responsible AI a top corporate priority? Last year, 69% said yes. This year, it was up to roughly 80%. So that's good, even though the other 20%, what are they thinking? And then we asked, are the need for safeguards and guardrails for governing AI, or is there a need for safeguards and guardrails for governing AI? 95.3% 93%, 95% said they were. Again, I'm not sure what the other 5% are thinking, you know. And then we asked whether those safeguards and guardrails are in place. And 2 years ago, 63% said those guardrails were in place. This year, it's up to 89%. So things are heading in the right direction from that perspective. And many of the organizations I talk to have responsible AI teams where they have representation from legal, compliance, HR, technology functions. So yeah, I think it's,
They're going in the right direction is what I'm hearing you say. It is a
yeah.
long game. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the most important thing that organizations should be focusing on.
I agree. No, makes sense. Let's shift gear about what you've learned and is there a book coming out? I don't know. But let me ask you this. If you were to write kind of the next chapter of your bestseller, which you have right behind you, Fail Fast, Learn Faster, right? Would anything change principally from back what you wrote to now? What did you learn over the last maybe year, a couple of years? Something you didn't fully anticipate back in 2021 to now?
Well, it's funny because I think in some respects the book is more relevant now than it was when I wrote it, because I wrote it from two perspectives. I wrote it from a long-term perspective, with the benefit of a long career. So it was advice for the long term, like, think differently and
act differently.
Think differently and, fail fast, learn fast, learn from experience, those type of things. Yeah. But the case study and examples that I used were what I had at hand. So they were from the present time. So now I would keep the key themes the same, but, there would be substantial exponential leaps in terms of the examples and illustrations of what organizations are doing. And in terms of a next book, some people write a lot of books. My good friend and colleague, Tom Davenport, I believe he writes about 3 books a year and is up to 30 plus.
Oh.
I like the short form articles. I write about 30 articles a year between HBR, MIT, and Forbes. So that kind of fits my style. I guess if I was a writer in terms of like literature, I'd probably write short stories as opposed to long epics.
I think even books are becoming shorter and shorter. If you look at the last few, books I've read, at least, they're no more than 100 pages, if that much. So the attention span is this much, which is now becoming this much for people. And then there's AI that can basically aggregate the entire world's information at your fingertips. So it is rough times. But Randy, if you were to look out, because you used the word long term earlier, if you were to look out 3 to 5 years, what do you think, based on everything you know so far, are the emerging challenges and opportunities that data and AI leadership should focus on? We'll start with opportunities maybe first.
Well, I think the opportunities is there's, I haven't really thought this through, but there's huge opportunities to reinvent businesses and reinvent the ways that you interact with your customers and the organizations that you use to do that more efficiently and more effectively. So I'll just leave it at that. I mean, I think that, you used the previous example of Henry Ford and asking at the time, if you ask your customers what they'd want. So I think that, people, when I went to an event yesterday, and there was leaders from Silicon Valley and there was folks from MIT, and a number of them were PhD and Rhodes Scholars and things of that kind, and venture capitalists that had made billions. And somebody started talking about, and this was just like, okay, I don't know. But they were very convinced, and they talked at length about this. They said that they thought that all of the data centers that were being built, they were going to have them on all the different planets and in different solar systems, and they had it all worked out, and with theoretical physics and all this type of stuff. And they spoke very matter-of-factly about billions of data centers being scattered throughout the universe. And I'm just sitting there with I don't know, pen and paper and listening and just saying this sounds like science fiction, but on the other hand it's not that different than what Elon Musk says.
Yeah, 20 years ago, robots were science fiction. Today, that's a reality. So, what's the art of the possible? I mean, movies, to me, created, there's a movie called Ready Player One. I don't know if you've seen it. Virtual reality, augmented reality kind of stuff. That was 15 years ago when Steven Spielberg actually directed that. Today, if you go and rewatch that movie, and as the others, a lot of it is almost near reality. So I think even though these sound like science fiction, I'm very, very bullish and excited
Yeah,
about
well,
the next 10 years. Yeah, yeah.
I will give you just one human story in
Yes.
conclusion, but I think it's a metaphor, and that is that this summer, every year I go to the MIT CDO IQ event, and I organize and moderate a CDO panel, and
Yes.
it's across the river from where I live in Boston. I'm in Boston, that's in
Yep.
Cambridge. So I have an Uber picking me up to drive me back to my place from the venue that it was held at, and the Uber driver is a chatty guy. And he said, "Oh, so, where are you going?" I said, "Well, I'm going back home." He said, "Well, where are you coming from?" And I said, "Oh, I was at this event." He said, "Oh, well, what were you doing at the event?" And I said, "Well, I was speaking." And he said, "What was the event about?" And then immediately, because I run into all this all the time, I just kind of go like, AI. AI, wow, AI is amazing. This is the Uber driver. Wow, AI is going to do this. AI is going to do that. So for the
Yeah.
next 15 minutes, I like listen to this and so forth. It didn't comment too much, except for when I was getting out of the car. I said to him, "I will tell you this though. I don't know where we'll be in 2 years or 7 years or 10 years or however many years, but you won't be driving the car. The car will be driving itself. And it won't be me in the back seat. It'll be a robot that
Nice. Very
yeah."
nice. Now,
So that's the future. That's a future that, may not be that far away at all.
agree. With that said, what are you afraid of? What are the challenges based on what you see that you're nervous about?
Well, any technology can be used for good or bad. Even going back to hammer or fire or any technology. Airplanes can take people to certain destinations very fast, or they can be flown into, the World Trade Center. So they can be used for any technology can be used for good or bad. One of the questions we asked in the survey is, are people fundamentally optimistic or pessimistic in terms of thinking that AI will be for greater benefit? And to my astonishment, and I think it's good in a way, 96% of the people that responded said that they thought it would ultimately be used for good. So there's a lot of things that can go bad along the way, but ultimately, as human beings, it's our responsibility. And I think that, there's in society and history, there's ups and downs and so forth. But I think usually as a species, we've managed to figure out how to apply technologies in ways that have ultimately led to improvements in healthcare, medicine, delivery of services, creating greater literacy and healthier people around the world. So overall, cautiously optimistic.
Cautiously optimistic. Fantastic. Randy, time flies by when I talk to you. I really, really appreciate your time. Is there anything else I missed you want to kind of cover before we wrap up?
Um, I
A
think
lot
we
more.
covered it. We could talk for hours, days, or weeks, but I think we kind of captured some of the key ideas.
Hopefully, once you have the survey results released, I would love to have you in my podcast again. Let's do another one after you get the general feedback as well. Randy, thank you again. It's an honor having you here. I know you've got a lot going on. Wish you good luck. And again, you are one of the few thought leaders that I look up on, and I will continue to look up in the future as well. Thank you for being here.
Appreciate the kind words, Arvin. Thank you.